In Chapter 1 of Thomas Carlyle's The History of the French Revolution, he examines the old regime in France prior to 1789. He begins by discussing how Louis XIV had centralized power and authority within his court at Versailles, creating a system where all other nobles were subservient to him. This led to an aristocracy that was both powerful and wealthy but also increasingly out of touch with its subjects as it became more focused on maintaining their own privileges than looking after those they governed over. Furthermore, this period saw increasing financial difficulties for many people due to high taxes imposed upon them while simultaneously providing little relief from poverty or hunger, leading some historians such as Tocqueville later describing pre-revolutionary France as having been asleep. Finally, Carlyle looks into how these issues combined together created a situation ripe for revolution when news spread about events occurring elsewhere in Europe during late 18th century which inspired ideas amongst commoners regarding liberty and equality, something previously unheard of under absolutism rule. The National Assembly was formed on June 17, 1789. It consisted of representatives from all three estates and had the power to make laws for France. The first act passed by the Assembly was a declaration that taxes should be equal among citizens regardless of their social class or estate status. This caused much debate between members as some argued it would lead to financial ruin while others believed it necessary in order to create an equitable society where everyone paid their fair share into government coffers. In addition, they abolished feudalism, which meant no more serfdom, and other privileges associated with being part of nobility were eliminated, such as exclusive hunting rights and exemptions from taxation. This also included abolishing titles like duke or count so that there could not be any special treatment based upon one's birthright alone anymore either. They then went on further reforms, including creating new civil codes, which replaced old ones, establishing freedom of the press regulations allowing people access information without fear retribution due censorship/suppression, etc. Finally, after months' deliberation over various issues related both internally within France itself externally towards foreign powers, eventually culminating Declaration Rights Man-Citizen July 26 same year, outlining basic human liberties enshrined law forevermore thereafter too. Chapter 3 of the History of the French Revolution by Thomas Carlyle focuses on the Constitution. It begins with a discussion about how France was in need for reform and that it had to be done quickly, as time was running out. This led to an assembly being formed which would create a new constitution for France. This became known as the National Assembly or Constituent Assembly. In order to ensure its success, members were elected from all over France who represented different classes and interests within society, including clergymen, lawyers, merchants, etc. The chapter then goes into detail regarding what exactly went into creating such a document, debates between various factions, such as royalists versus republicans, compromises made along ideological lines, for example allowing some form of monarchy while also introducing democratic elements, and so forth until eventually they reached agreement upon certain key points like freedom of speech/religion/press, etc., separation between church and state plus other civil liberties enshrined in law. Finally, after months' hard work, the final draft is presented before King Louis XVI himself, where he reluctantly signs off on it, thus making official one most important documents ever written, the Declaration of Rights. The chapter begins with the King and Queen's decision to flee Paris in order to escape from revolutionary forces. They set out on June 20, 1791 under cover of night, but were quickly discovered by revolutionaries who had been tipped off about their plans. The royal family was then arrested at Varennes-en-Argonne and brought back to Paris, where they faced a hostile crowd that demanded answers for why they tried to leave France without permission. Meanwhile, news of the attempted flight spread throughout Europe, causing shockwaves among other monarchs as well as French citizens who felt betrayed by their leaders' actions. In response, many people began calling for more radical reforms such as abolishing monarchy altogether or creating a constitutional government instead of an absolute one like before. These ideas would eventually lead up towards further revolutions down the line, including those during 1848, which saw multiple European countries overthrow existing governments in favor of new ones based around democratic principles rather than autocratic rule. Chapter 5 of the History of the French Revolution by Thomas Carlyle focuses on the Legislative Assembly, which was formed in October 1791. It consisted mainly of moderate constitutionalists who wanted to maintain a balance between monarchy and democracy. They sought to create an effective government that would protect citizens' rights while also preserving order within society. This assembly passed several laws such as abolishing feudalism, granting freedom for all religions except Catholicism, which remained official, establishing universal male suffrage and creating a new constitution with limited powers given to King Louis XVI. However, their efforts were met with opposition from both sides. Royalist conservatives opposed any reforms while radical revolutionaries demanded more drastic changes than what had been proposed so far. As tensions rose throughout France due to these conflicting views, it became clear that this legislative body could not provide stability or peace without further compromise among its members, something they ultimately failed at achieving before being replaced by another governing institution later on in history. The Reign of Terror began with the fall of Robespierre and his allies in July 1794. The new government, led by Paul Barras, was determined to restore order after years of chaos and bloodshed. To this end, they instituted a series of measures designed to suppress any further revolutionary activity or dissent from the established regime. These included strict censorship laws, harsh punishments for anyone suspected of counter-revolutionary activities, public executions as an example to others who might oppose them, mass arrests without trial on suspicion alone, summary trials before revolutionary tribunals which had no legal basis but were used solely as instruments for political repression against those deemed enemies by the ruling authorities. In addition, all forms of religious worship other than that sanctioned by the state were banned, while clubs devoted exclusively to politics, such as Jacobin clubs, were outlawed altogether, effectively silencing opposition voices within society itself. Despite these draconian measures, however, there remained pockets of resistance throughout France until finally it was crushed completely following Napoleon's coup d'état in November 1799, when he declared himself first consul, thus ending both the revolution and its accompanying reign of terror once and for all time. Chapter 7 of the History of the French Revolution by Thomas Carlyle focuses on the Directory, a 5-member executive body that was established in 1795 to replace France's revolutionary government. It describes how this new form of government had its own set of problems and challenges as it attempted to maintain order while also allowing for some degree of freedom. In particular, it discusses how corruption became rampant within the Directory due to bribery and nepotism among members. However, despite these issues, there were still successes such as military victories against Austria, which helped restore national pride amongst citizens. Additionally, economic reforms implemented during this period allowed for increased trade with other countries, leading towards greater prosperity overall. Ultimately, though, internal divisions between factions led to instability, resulting in Napoleon Bonaparte's coup d'état, which ended up overthrowing them entirely in November 1799, thus bringing an end to their reign over France after 4 years. The chapter begins with a description of the state of Paris in 1790, and how it had become an increasingly chaotic place. The National Assembly was struggling to maintain order as factions began to form within its ranks. Meanwhile, foreign powers were beginning to take notice of France's revolution, and some even sent representatives or ambassadors, known as consuls, into the country in order to observe events firsthand. This led many people from other countries who wanted their own revolutions, such as Americans, coming over for advice on how they could achieve similar success back home. At this time there were also several diplomatic missions being conducted between different European nations regarding French affairs. These included negotiations about trade agreements, military alliances against revolutionary forces abroad, etc. In addition, various international conferences took place during which diplomats discussed matters related not only directly but indirectly too, like religious freedom across Europe or abolishing slavery worldwide, all while trying hard not be seen taking sides either way when it came down specific issues concerning France itself. As part of this process, Louis XVI appointed Charles Maurice de Talleyrand Périgord his foreign minister so that he would have someone experienced enough at handling delicate political situations both domestically and internationally alike. Talleyrand proved himself quite capable by successfully negotiating treaties with Prussia and Austria, however, due largely because internal divisions among revolutionaries themselves plus external pressure from monarchies around them made things difficult. Overall progress slow going nonetheless. Eventually though, after much debate amongst members inside Assembly Hall, eventually passed Declaration Rights Man Citizen late summer 1789, thus officially establishing Republic Nation under new constitution written up following year. July 14 Bastille Day celebration held commemorate event throughout land. Ever since then each anniversary date celebrated same manner every single year without fail, no matter what else happening world outside those walls, city limits, capital region, entire republic. Whole. The chapter begins with a discussion of the French Revolution and its effects on France. The revolution had caused great upheaval in society, leading to political instability and economic hardship for many people. This led to an increase in crime as well as social unrest among those who were not able to benefit from the new government's policies or take advantage of opportunities created by it. In response, Napoleon Bonaparte was appointed first consul of France in 1799, and he quickly set about consolidating his power through military force while also introducing reforms that would help stabilize the country politically, economically, socially, and culturally. He established a centralized bureaucracy which allowed him greater control over all aspects of life within France. This included creating laws that could be enforced uniformly throughout the nation regardless if they favored one group more than another, such as abolishing feudalism. Additionally, he sought out alliances with other European powers so that any potential threats against his rule could be countered effectively before they became too powerful themselves, thus ensuring peace both domestically and abroad during his reign, 1804–14. Finally, under Napoleon's leadership there was significant progress made towards modernizing infrastructure, such industrialization projects like canals/roads being built across Europe, along with educational reform initiatives aimed at improving literacy rates amongst citizens living outside major cities, etc. All these changes helped create what is now known today the Napoleonic Empire, where despite some setbacks due largely external forces beyond their control eventually saw them become one most influential nations world history has ever seen. Chapter 10 of the History of the French Revolution by Thomas Carlyle focuses on the Restoration period, which began in 1814 and lasted until 1830. During this time, France was ruled by a series of monarchs from the House of Bourbon: Louis XVIII, 1815–24, Charles X, 1824–30, and his brother Louis XIX for just 20 minutes before he abdicated to make way for their cousin Henri V, who reigned as King Henry IV during July 1830. This chapter examines how these rulers attempted to restore order after years of revolution but faced opposition both internally from liberals seeking greater freedoms and externally through foreign intervention led primarily by Britain's Prime Minister Lord Liverpool. Despite attempts at reforms such as introducing freedom or religion, press censorship laws were still enforced, while political clubs like La Société des Amis du Peuple continued to be banned, leading many revolutionaries into exile abroad where they plotted against those ruling back home in Paris. some even returning with Napoleon Bonaparte when he escaped Elba Island only months later, sparking what would become known as the 100 Days. Ultimately, however, it wasn't enough. Despite popular support amongst soldiers, loyalists failed him once again, resulting in another defeat at Waterloo, followed shortly afterwards with an end restoration rule altogether, ushering new era under constitutional monarchy. Lead firstly King Louis Philippe I. Chapter 11 of the History of the French Revolution by Thomas Carlyle begins with a description of Paris in July 1830, as it was on the eve of revolution. It then goes into detail about how Charles X had alienated much public opinion through his policies and actions since coming to power in 1824. This included an attempt to restore absolute monarchy, which led many people to believe that he wanted France returned back under royal control, instead allowing for more liberal reforms like those seen during Napoleon's reign. Additionally, there were several other issues such as censorship laws and restrictions placed upon freedom of speech that further angered citizens who felt their rights were being taken away from them without any consultation or consideration given beforehand. Finally, when news spread throughout Europe regarding these oppressive measures enacted by Charles X, this caused even greater unrest amongst both foreign powers and within France itself, leading up until finally culminating into what is known today as the Three Glorious Days, July 27–29th. During this time period, various barricades went up around major cities including Paris, where revolutionaries fought against government forces while also calling out for new leadership, eventually resulting in Louis Philippe becoming king after abdicating throne due to him not wanting bloodshed continue any more than necessary. In conclusion, Chapter 11 provides readers with detailed account events surrounding lead-up towards revolutionary changes taking place across country during summer months 1830, ultimately ending rule over monarchs, once again ushering era liberalism democracy. The Revolution of 1848 began with the overthrow of King Louis Philippe and his government. The people were in a state of unrest due to economic hardship, political repression, and social injustice. On February 22, an uprising broke out on the streets of Paris, which quickly spread throughout France as well as other parts of Europe. This revolution was characterized by its radicalism. It sought not only to replace one regime but also create a new society based upon principles such as liberty, equality, and fraternity for all citizens regardless their class or gender status. In addition to this goal, there was also strong support for universal suffrage among those involved in the revolt who wanted everyone's voice heard when deciding how they should be governed going forward into modernity. In response, provisional governments formed across many cities including Paris, where elections were held that resulted in representatives from various classes being chosen. These individuals then created constitutions outlining what rights each citizen would have under these newly established republics, while simultaneously attempting to address some grievances brought up during earlier protests like workers' wages and hours, along with women's rights issues, etc. Unfortunately, though, despite initial successes, things soon started unraveling after foreign powers intervened militarily against revolutionaries, leading them back towards more conservative rule, eventually culminating June 24 coup d'état orchestrated Napoleon III, nephew original emperor, ushering Second Empire era French history. The Second Empire of France was established in 1852, when Louis Napoleon Bonaparte declared himself emperor. He had been elected president 3 years earlier and used his position to consolidate power for the new regime. The government under the Second Empire was authoritarian. It centralized authority with a strong executive branch led by an emperor who held absolute control over all aspects of French life. This included military affairs, foreign policy, economic development, and social reform initiatives such as education reforms that sought to create a more unified nation-state out of disparate regions within France's borders. Under this system, there were also restrictions on civil liberties, including freedom of speech and press censorship, which limited public discourse about politics or other controversial topics during this period in history. Despite these limitations, however, many positive developments occurred during the reigns of both Napoleon's I and II. Infrastructure projects like railroads improved transportation networks throughout Europe, while industrialization increased production capabilities across multiple sectors, leading to greater wealth creation opportunities for citizens living within its boundaries. Chapter 14 of the History of the French Revolution by Thomas Carlyle focuses on the Third Republic. It begins with a discussion about how France was in disarray after Napoleon's fall and that it had to be rebuilt from scratch, as well as an overview of what happened during this period. This includes details such as Louis XVIII being restored to power, his reign ending due to popular unrest leading up to Charles X taking over. However, he too is overthrown when people revolt against him for trying to impose censorship laws upon them. After these events occur, there are several different governments which come into play, including one led by General Lafayette, who attempts but fails at restoring order within France before eventually resigning himself out of office, leaving behind a new government known simply as the Provisional Government. This provisional government then goes on to create their own constitution called the Charter, which outlines all rights citizens have under its rule, while also establishing universal suffrage among other things, thus creating what we now know today, the Third Republic, 1870 to 1940. In conclusion, Chapter 14 discusses how despite many changes occurring throughout this time frame, ultimately they were able to lead towards something more stable than ever before, namely the creation and establishment of modern-day republics like those found in Europe today. Chapter 15 of the History of the French Revolution by Thomas Carlyle is titled Conclusion. In this chapter, Carlyle reflects on how far France has come since 1789 and what it means for its future. He notes that while there have been many changes in government over time, some things remain constant: a strong sense of national identity, an appreciation for liberty and equality, and a commitment to progress through education. Additionally, he argues that despite all the turmoil experienced during the Revolution period, including wars with other countries, France still stands as one nation united under law. Finally, he concludes his book by noting that although much work remains ahead if France wants to achieve true greatness again after such tumultuous times, she can do so provided her citizens continue their dedication towards achieving justice within society's framework. With these words ringing out into eternity from beyond history's pages, we are left with hope not only for our own futures, but also those who will follow us long after we're gone, hoping they too may find peace amidst chaos, just like generations before them did when faced with similar struggles throughout human existence.